What if everything we know about ancient civilizations is wrong? The dust still clung to my boots when I first saw it. A perfect grid stretching beneath jungle overgrowth, streets intersecting at right angles across terrain that supposedly housed primitive farmers 4,000 years ago. My compass aligned exactly with the ancient roadways. No deviation, no approximation, just geometric precision that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city. But this was just the first impossibility. Across 15 sites on 3 continents, I found the same pattern repeating. Cities that shouldn't exist, engineering that defies our timeline, knowledge that appeared fully formed, as if someone downloaded the blueprints directly into ancient minds. Underground cities carved 18 stories into bedrock with ventilation systems that modern engineers study for insights. Harbor breakwaters built with concrete that grows stronger in seawater, a formula we only rediscovered in the 20th century. Mountain terraces holding thousands of tons of soil at angles calculated to the exact degree needed for earthquake resistance. Desert cities sustaining populations larger than medieval London using water management that rivals contemporary municipal systems. The evidence is undeniable. Our ancestors possessed capabilities we've spent millennia trying to relearn. They built with precision we struggle to match. They planned with sophistication that makes our modern cities look haphazard by comparison. Tonight, I'm taking you on an expedition into 15 lost cities so perfectly designed that they challenge everything we think we know about human history. Pack light, question everything, and prepare to see the ancient world through new eyes. The first site waits in Pakistan, where a 4,000-year-old grid system puts modern urban planning to shame. The theodolite confirmed what my eyes refused to believe. Mohenjo-daro's streets intersect at perfect right angles across 250 acres of floodplain. No medieval wandering, no organic growth. Just geometric precision that wouldn't look out of place in Manhattan, except this grid was laid 4,500 years ago. I knelt in the dust where 2 ancient streets met, pulled out my compass, and watched the needle align exactly with the roadway. Whoever designed this understood cardinal directions with an accuracy that makes you wonder what tools they were really using. The city blocks measure almost identical dimensions, repeated across the entire settlement. Each house connects to a drainage system so sophisticated that wastewater flowed through covered channels beneath the streets. Standing in one of these ancient sewers, flashlight revealing corbelled brick architecture still intact, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't trial and error. This was implemented knowledge, complete, systematic, as if the entire city sprang into existence from a blueprint that already existed in someone's mind. But whose? And more troubling, where did that knowledge come from in an age we're told was just learning to write? The residential quarters told their own story. Every home, from the largest mansion to the smallest worker's dwelling, had access to the drainage system. Private bathrooms with sophisticated waste disposal, public wells positioned at regular intervals throughout the grid. Water management that wouldn't be matched in Europe until Roman times 3,000 years later. I mapped the sewer network across 6 city blocks, discovering that channels maintained consistent gradients, preventing blockages while ensuring flow. The engineering knowledge required to calculate these gradients to plan an entire city's waste management before laying the first brick suggests something we're uncomfortable admitting. These weren't primitive builders stumbling toward civilization. They were implementing a complete urban system that someone, somewhere, had already perfected. The Great Bath stopped me completely. a public pool measuring 39 feet by 23 feet by 8 feet deep, sealed with bitumen to prevent leaks, supplied by its own well with a drainage system that rivals modern swimming pools. The steps down into the bath are perfectly uniform. The floor is level within millimeters. The walls show no signs of water damage after 4.5 millennia. This is hydraulic engineering that understands water pressure, volume displacement, and long-term maintenance. Standing in that empty bath, running my hand along bricks that still fit together seamlessly, I felt the weight of the question that follows me through every ruin. Who taught them? Where did this knowledge originate? Because cities don't just appear fully planned with advanced infrastructure. They evolve, grow, make mistakes, learn, adapt. But Mohenjo-daro seems to have skipped that entire process, emerging complete and sophisticated from the very beginning. The surrounding farmland held another secret about their planning. Irrigation channels branch from the river in patterns that optimize water distribution across thousands of acres. The gradients are calculated to prevent erosion while ensuring flow. This is landscape-scale engineering that requires surveying tools, mathematical calculation, and understanding of hydrology. And it all connects back to that perfect grid, those right-angle streets, those uniformly sized blocks. A city designed as a single unified system before construction ever began. But the precision I found in Pakistan's dust would pale compared to what waited for me 8,000 feet up in the Peruvian Andes, where stone temples touch the clouds and water flows uphill. They call it the lost city of the Incas, but that name barely scratches the surface. I stood at Machu Picchu's Intihuatana stone as dawn broke, watching shadows move with calendric precision across carved surfaces. This wasn't just a city. It was an astronomical instrument built at 8,000 feet, where stone temples align with solstice sunrises and sacred peaks frame equinox events. The stonework alone defies explanation, blocks weighing 50 tons fitted so perfectly that centuries of earthquakes couldn't shake them loose. But here's what kept me awake in my tent that night: the city's water management. 16 fountains fed by a single spring, each one functioning at optimal flow rate despite the mountainous terrain. The gradients are so precisely calculated that water maintains perfect pressure throughout the system. Modern hydraulic engineers who've studied the channels admit they couldn't improve the design with contemporary tools. I traced the main water conduit from its source, noting how it curves around the mountain with a grade so subtle my level could barely detect it. This level of planning requires understanding fluid dynamics, topography, and long-term sustainability. It requires something we don't credit ancient builders with possessing. The agricultural terraces that ring the city aren't just farming plots. They're temperature regulation systems. Each level creates a microclimate protected from wind, maximizing sun exposure, optimized for different crops at different elevations. I measured the soil depth on 3 different terrace levels. Each one varies, deeper on lower terraces, shallower higher up, corresponding to root depths of the crops they were designed to support. Someone understood permaculture principles 6 centuries before we had a name for them. But the astronomical alignments pushed me into territory that archaeologists avoid discussing. The Temple of the Sun's window frames the winter solstice sunrise with precision that requires years of observation and calculation. The Intihuatana stone, whose name means hitching post of the sun, casts shadows that mark equinoxes and solstices with accuracy that suggests it functioned as a working calendar. I spent 3 days measuring angles, checking alignments, photographing shadow movements. Every calculation confirmed what seemed impossible. This city was designed as a three-dimensional astronomical observatory, where buildings, windows, stones, and sightlines all work together to track celestial cycles. The construction technique haunted me more than the alignments. Polygonal masonry where stones fit together without mortar, some blocks having 12 angles interlocking with surrounding stones. I photographed one wall section for 20 minutes trying to understand the sequence of construction. Did they shape stones to fit existing walls? Did they use wooden templates? Either method requires precision that Bronze Age tools shouldn't achieve. The stones show no chisel marks, no obvious tool signatures, just smooth surfaces that mesh together as if they grew that way. Standing on the main plaza at sunset, watching light paint the surrounding peaks gold and crimson, I understood why this place feels sacred. It's not just beautiful. It's proof that our ancestors possessed knowledge we've spent centuries trying to relearn. Knowledge of engineering, astronomy, agriculture, and something else. Something about harmony between human design and natural landscape that we've lost in our modern grid cities and concrete sprawl. But if Machu Picchu challenged my understanding of mountain engineering, what I found carved beneath Turkish farmland would shatter my assumptions about underground architecture entirely. My first glimpse of Derinkuyu came through a small opening in a Turkish farmhouse basement. What began as storage space descended 18 stories into bedrock. This isn't a cave system. It's an engineered city hollowed from solid volcanic rock, capable of sheltering 20,000 people, complete with ventilation shafts, wells, wine presses, and stables, all carved downward into the earth with Bronze Age tools. I descended level by level, flashlight beam catching tool marks in the walls that spoke of patient, deliberate excavation. But the ventilation system stopped me cold. 52 shafts, some plunging over 180 feet, distributed fresh air throughout the complex with such efficiency that you could light a match on the lowest level. I spent an hour mapping the airflow with smoke, watching it drawn through passages that create natural circulation using temperature differentials between levels. The shafts aren't randomly placed. They're positioned to create convection currents, pulling cool air down while exhausting warm air upward. Whoever designed this understood pressure differentials and air movement in ways that suggest testing, calculation, and revision. This wasn't accidental discovery. This was engineered climate control achieved without fans, without pumps, without anything except knowledge of how air behaves. The deeper I descended, the more I noticed temperature regulation. Level 8 maintains a consistent cool temperature year-round, perfect for food storage. Wine presses and oil presses occupy this level, taking advantage of the stable conditions. The communal areas on level 5 stay warmer, suitable for gathering spaces where families would have lived during whatever threat drove them underground. The kitchens cluster on level 3, positioned where ventilation shafts create natural chimneys for cooking smoke. This is three-dimensional urban planning that treats the underground city as a complete ecosystem, not just a refuge. The millstone doors stopped me on level 7. Each one weighs over 1,000 pounds, but rolls closed from the inside with minimal effort, sealing corridors against invasion. The pivot mechanism is carved into the stone itself, creating a bearing surface that's lasted millennia. I pushed against one door, feeling it move smoothly despite its mass. The engineering is flawless: weight distribution, pivot placement, floor gradient, all calculated to allow a single person to secure an entire level against attack. But here's what kept me exploring long after my guide wanted to surface. The complexity suggests multiple generations of planning, or something more unsettling. Did they finish it in a single generation, driven by urgency we can't fathom? The uniformity of construction suggests a single building phase, not centuries of gradual expansion. The ventilation system works as one integrated network, not something cobbled together over time. Standing in a chapel on level 11, the deepest accessible point, I felt the weight of rock above me and wondered what threat justified this effort. What were they hiding from? Who invests this much engineering genius into creating an invisible city unless the danger is existential? The dining halls on level 4 held long stone tables still in place, carved from the same rock as the walls and floor. Families ate here in lamplight, breathing air pulled down from the surface through shafts that demonstrate knowledge we're not supposed to find in ancient Cappadocia. But if underground cities challenge our assumptions, what I found next would prove that ancient builders understood something even more fundamental: the power to defy the sea itself. Plato wrote about it. Explorers died searching for it. But what if Atlantis wasn't myth? I'm not talking about the fantasy version, but the archaeological reality that's emerging from Mauritania's coastal marshes and satellite imaging of the Rishat structure. The descriptions match too precisely. Concentric rings of land and water, a city designed as perfect circles within circles, harbors connected by canals that allowed ships to reach the very center. What haunts me isn't whether Atlantis existed, it's the description of its planning. Plato describes a city where every measurement follows mathematical ratios, where the rings are spaced according to specific proportions, where temples and government buildings occupy positions determined by geometric principles. This is urban planning that treats an entire city as a single unified design, not something that grows organically over centuries. I've walked the streets of ancient Roman Athens, cities that sprawled and adapted, but the Atlantis Plato describes sounds like something drafted on a design table by engineers who thought in terms of symmetry, defense, and symbolic geometry. The detail about their harbor engineering leads us to territory that blurs legend with technical possibility. Plato describes breakwaters and docks capable of handling large fleets, canal systems that connected the rings and allowed naval vessels to move between defensive layers. The outer harbor faced the sea, protected by artificial walls. The inner harbors connected through channels with gates and towers, creating a defensive network where each ring could be isolated and defended independently. This is military engineering combined with urban design on a scale that wouldn't be attempted again until the Renaissance. If even a fraction of it was real, we're looking at a civilization that understood city planning at a level Europe wouldn't reach for 2,000 years. The descriptions of their agriculture system suggest knowledge that sounds almost modern. Irrigated fields fed by the canal network positioned in the outer rings where soil was richest. The canals served triple purpose: transportation, irrigation, and defense. Water management on a city scale, designed before construction began, implemented as a unified system. This matches what I've seen in Angkor Wat, in Mohenjo-daro, in every advanced ancient city. Water is the key. But here's what stops archaeologists from taking Atlantis seriously, beyond the obvious problems of location and evidence. The timeline Plato gives places at 9,000 years before his time, deep in the prehistoric period when we're told humans were just figuring out agriculture. A civilization with this level of sophistication existing that early breaks our understanding of human development. It suggests knowledge appeared fully formed, not through gradual progression. Standing at the Rishat structure in Mauritania, Looking at concentric circles visible from space, I felt the weight of possibility. These rings aren't city ruins, they're geological formations. But their dimensions match Plato's description with unsettling accuracy. The outer ring measures just over 23 kilometers in diameter. The spacing between rings follows proportional relationships. Natural formation or ancient foundation? The debate continues. What we can say with certainty is this. Whether Atlantis existed or not, the city Plato described represents engineering and planning knowledge that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. And that knowledge appears again and again in ruins scattered across the globe. The next site would take me to Peru, where fortress walls built on impossible angles have survived 5 centuries of earthquakes that destroyed everything the Spanish built. I almost missed it. Ollantaytambo looks like picturesque ruins from the valley floor. But climb to the temple complex and you're confronted with megaliths that shouldn't be there. Blocks of red granite weighing over 50 tons, transported from a quarry across the valley, then lifted hundreds of feet up the mountainside and fitted into walls at angles that seem to defy gravity. Some stones interlock with 6 faces, each surface ground to create seamless joints. Running my hand across one junction, I couldn't slide a credit card between blocks. No mortar, just stone on stone, held by precision cutting and perfect weight distribution. But here's what made my engineer friend go silent. The entire site is built on an incline, with terraces, temples, and storage rooms ascending the slope at varying angles. Yet everything maintains structural integrity. The water channels carved into the stones flow at gradients so exact that they prevent erosion while maintaining flow rate. I photographed one channel that curves around a building corner, maintaining depth and width through the turn. Something that requires understanding how water behaves under different pressures and speeds. This isn't decorative stonework. This is functional hydraulic engineering carved into blocks that weigh more than trucks. At sunset, I noticed something else. The way certain windows frame specific peaks, the alignment of walls with seasonal sun positions. This city wasn't just built, it was oriented. The Temple of the Sun captures the winter solstice sunrise through a trapezoidal window that frames the light with precision that suggests years of astronomical observation. The alignment isn't approximate, it's exact. But the quarry across the valley held an answer I wasn't expecting. I hiked there the next morning, finding massive blocks in various stages of completion. Some show clear evidence of the extraction process. Channels cut into bedrock, wedge holes for splitting stone, ramps for moving blocks down the mountain, but one unfinished megalith stopped me completely. It's partially detached from the cliff face, still connected at one edge, showing how they planned to separate it. The stone weighs an estimated 150 tons. The surface is smooth, worked to near completion before the project was abandoned. Tool marks are visible, but they don't match what Bronze Age technology should produce. The precision is wrong, the smoothness is wrong, the scale is wrong. Standing in that quarry, looking across the valley at temple blocks that came from this same cliff, I tried to visualize the logistics. How do you move 100-ton stones across a river, up a mountain, and into position on sloped terrain using ropes and wooden rollers? The Spanish chronicles claim the Inca moved stones using thousands of workers and elaborate ramp systems. But the math doesn't work. The energy required, the coordination needed, the precision demanded by the final placement. All of it suggests that techniques we haven't discovered. The locals tell stories their grandparents told them. Stories about stones that were softened like clay, shaped while pliable, then hardened again. Stories modern archaeology dismisses as folklore. But standing among these impossible megaliths, running my hands over joints that shouldn't exist, I'm not so quick to dismiss anything. Because the next city I visited would demonstrate water mastery that makes contemporary municipal systems look primitive by comparison. They told me Angkor Wat was a temple. They were wrong. It's the centerpiece of an urban complex that once covered 400 square miles, supported by a hydraulic system so advanced that modern engineers study it for insight into water management. I stood on the causeway at dawn, watching the temple spires reflect in the rectangular moat, and realized this entire city is a machine designed to capture, store, and distribute water across a landscape that swings between drought and monsoon. The Berry reservoirs, some measuring 5 miles long, aren't just water storage. They're volume calculators built into the terrain, using natural topography to create regulated flow to rice fields, residential areas, and temples. I spent days mapping the canal network with GPS, discovering channels that connect reservoirs across miles of jungle with gradients so subtle that gravity alone controls flow rate. The dry season doesn't stop the system. Water stored during monsoons feeds the city year-round through a distribution network that rivals modern municipal systems. But what chills me is the planning required. This wasn't added piecemeal. The entire city, from temples to rice paddies to residential moats, functions as an integrated water management system. Someone understood the full scope before construction began. Someone mapped water flow for a city of over 1 million people using tools we'd consider primitive. The temple complex itself reveals another layer of this mathematical sophistication. Angkor Wat sits at the center of a geometric grid, aligned to spring equinox sunrise with the precision of an astronomical observatory. The 5 towers represent Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain of Hindu cosmology, but they also function as markers for celestial observations. I climbed to the central tower, noting how the structure's dimensions encode mathematical relationships. The distances between galleries, the height of towers, the length of causeways, all follow proportional ratios that appear in temple architecture across Cambodia. This is sacred geometry made functional, where religious symbolism and practical engineering merge into single structures. But the reservoir system haunted me more than the temples. The West Baray measures 5 miles by 1.5 miles, holding enough water to irrigate the surrounding farmland through 6 months of dry season. The embankments that contain it rise 16 feet above the surrounding plain, built from millions of cubic yards of earth moved by hand. The engineering required to ensure these embankments don't fail, to prevent leaks, to maintain structural integrity through centuries of monsoon cycles, requires understanding of soil mechanics and hydrostatic pressure. I walked the length of one embankment, noting the compacted layers, the drainage features, the way the slope is calculated to resist erosion. Modern dam builders study these ancient reservoirs, trying to understand techniques that produced structures more durable than many contemporary designs. The canals that feed from the barays maintain consistent gradients for miles, ensuring water flows at speeds that prevent both stagnation and erosion. This is landscape-scale hydraulic engineering that shouldn't exist in the 12th century. Yet here it stands, still functional in places, still demonstrating knowledge that required generations of observation, testing, and mathematical calculation. knowledge that was somehow available when construction began, not discovered through trial and error. But if Angkor's water systems impressed me, the earthquake-resistant architecture I found next would redefine my understanding of structural engineering entirely. Cusco sits in a seismic zone that's shaken Peru for millennia, yet walls built by the Incas 6 centuries ago still stand while colonial Spanish structures crumble around them. I witnessed this firsthand during a minor tremor, watching stone walls shift slightly, absorb the energy, then settle back into position. The technique is called ashlar masonry, stones cut to interlock without mortar, each one slightly convex so they rock during earthquakes rather than topple. But standing before the 12-angled stone, tracing its edges with my fingertips, I realized this goes beyond earthquake resistance. This is mathematics made visible. Each angle calculated to distribute weight not just downward, but across multiple contact points, turning every stone into a structural support for its neighbors. The walls taper inward slightly, creating stability through geometry rather than mass. I measured the incline, 5 degrees from vertical. Not an approximation, not close enough. Exact, 5 degrees. The optimal angle for this type of construction, calculated correctly by people working with bronze tools and stone hammers. Modern seismic engineers who've analyzed these walls admit the ancient technique is superior to many contemporary methods. The stones don't just resist earthquakes, they absorb and dissipate energy through their interlocking design. How did builders working without computer modeling calculate load distribution? How did they test angles and weight ratios to find the perfect balance between stability and flexibility? The Spanish chronicles describe Inca masons spending months on single stones, grinding surfaces until they achieved perfect fit. But that explanation only covers execution, not design. Someone had to understand the principles before work began. The royal complex on the hill above held another clue about their methods. Enormous blocks, some weighing over 300 tons, fitted into walls that curve and undulate like flowing water frozen in stone. I photographed one section where the wall follows a natural rock outcropping, incorporating the bedrock into the structure itself. This isn't just building on top of landscape. This is merging architecture with geology, using natural formations as foundation elements while maintaining the geometric precision of human construction. The joints between stones show grinding marks, evidence of the patient process of achieving perfect fit. But no tool marks on the faces. The surfaces are smooth, almost polished, showing no obvious signatures of bronze chisels or stone hammers. Some researchers suggest the Inca used wooden or leather templates to transfer patterns from one stone to another. Others propose harder stones for grinding softer ones. But neither explanation accounts for the scale or the precision. Standing in the narrow street called Hatun Rumiak, surrounded by walls that have survived 5 centuries of earthquakes, I felt the inadequacy of our explanations. We can describe what they did. We can measure angles and analyze techniques, but we can't fully explain how they knew it would work, how they calculated ratios without mathematics as we understand it, how they achieved precision without measurement tools that leave evidence behind. The construction knowledge encoded in Cusco's stones appears again in ruins across Peru, suggesting a shared understanding that spread across the Inca Empire. But did they invent these techniques or inherit them from earlier cultures? The next site I visited would suggest answers that archaeology isn't ready to accept. Cappadocia's underground cities number in the dozens, but Caemachli operates on a scale that suggests desperation mixed with genius. 11 levels descending into volcanic tuff, housing 8,000 people in a warren of rooms, corridors, and communal spaces carved entirely from bedrock. But here's what stopped my descent on level 7, the lighting problem. Yes, they had oil lamps, but smoke accumulation in an underground city this size should make lower levels uninhabitable. Yet the air stays clear. The ventilation shafts that thread through 11 stories create a circulation pattern that draws smoke upward while pulling fresh air down through secondary channels. I spent hours with smoke generators mapping the flow, discovering that the system is designed with something that shouldn't exist: understanding of air pressure dynamics and convection currents. The shafts aren't randomly placed. They're positioned to create natural circulation using temperature differentials between levels. Warm air rises through primary shafts while cooler surface air descends through intake channels positioned at the city's perimeter. The result is constant airflow that refreshes the entire complex without mechanical assistance. This is climate engineering achieved through architectural design alone. The deeper I descended, the more I noticed temperature regulation. Level 8 maintains a consistent, cool temperature year-round, perfect for food storage. Massive storage rooms line this level, their walls carved smooth to prevent moisture accumulation. Wine presses and grain storage occupy chambers that stay dry despite being deep underground. The communal areas on level 5 stay warmer, suitable for gathering spaces where families would have lived during whatever threat drove them underground. But the construction sequence raises questions that archaeology struggles to answer. Did they start from the top and dig down, or excavate a vertical shaft first and carve outward from that? Either method requires spatial reasoning that's difficult to achieve underground. How did they maintain level floors across multiple chambers without surveying tools? How did they ensure ventilation shafts met their targets after penetrating hundreds of feet through solid rock? I examined tool marks on level 9, finding evidence of systematic excavation. Parallel grooves where some kind of pick or chisel was used to weaken the stone before removal. The marks are uniform, suggesting standardized tools and techniques. But the volume of material removed is staggering. Millions of cubic feet of rock carved out, and where did it go? Surface deposits around the city don't account for the excavated volume. Some of it was used for construction above ground, but not nearly enough. The millstone doors on each level represent another engineering achievement, each one carved from a single piece of stone balanced on a central pivot that allows it to roll closed with minimal effort. The door on level 6 weighs over 1,500 pounds, but moves smoothly enough that I could seal the corridor myself. The pivot mechanism shows wear patterns from centuries of use, yet still functions perfectly. Standing in a chapel on level 11, the deepest accessible point, I felt the oppressive weight of rock above and wondered about the psychology of building downward. What threat justified this effort? What knowledge allowed them to create a functional city in conditions that should have been impossible? But if underground cities challenged my assumptions, what I discovered next about ancient harbor construction would prove that our ancestors conquered not just earth and air, but the sea itself. Caesarea Maritima shouldn't exist. King Herod built it on a coast with no natural harbor, using construction techniques that wouldn't be replicated for over 1,000 years. I dove the underwater ruins, running my hands over concrete that survived 2 millennia of wave action. This isn't ordinary concrete. It's hydraulic concrete, a formula that cures underwater and actually strengthens with exposure to seawater. The harbor breakwater stretched nearly half a mile into the Mediterranean, creating an artificial port in open water. But here's what shook me: the size of the blocks. Some weigh over 50 tons, lowered into position underwater with precision that suggests understanding of hydrostatics and marine engineering that Rome supposedly didn't possess. I measured one block still in position, 43 feet long, 15 feet wide, perfectly rectangular despite being submerged for 2,000 years. The concrete formula uses volcanic ash from Pozzuoli, mixed with lime and seawater in ratios that modern analysis shows create a chemical reaction with seawater, actually improving strength over time. Contemporary concrete degrades in marine environments. Roman concrete evolves, growing stronger as minerals from seawater crystallize within the matrix. How did they discover this? The recipe requires specific volcanic ash from a particular region of Italy, mixed with lime in precise proportions, then combined with seawater during the setting process. This suggests experimentation, testing, failure, and refinement over many projects. But Caesarea was built in just 12 years, implying the knowledge already existed when construction began. The harbor included something even more sophisticated: a lighthouse, warehouses, and a sophisticated mooring system that allowed ships to dock safely even during storms. The breakwater created a protected basin large enough for the Roman grain fleet, the massive vessels that fed the empire. But constructing in open water presents challenges that land-based building never faces. Waves, currents, tides, all working to destroy your structure as you build it. The solution was wooden forms lowered into position, then filled with the hydraulic concrete mixture. The forms created chambers that allowed the concrete to cure underwater, protected from wave action until it hardened. But positioning these forms in exact locations, ensuring they're level and aligned, all while working from boats in open water, requires surveying techniques and construction coordination that pushes the boundaries of what we credit ancient engineers with achieving. I swam along the breakwater's remnants, noting how the structure tapers toward the base, creating hydrodynamic shape that deflects wave energy rather than resisting it head-on. This is coastal engineering that understands fluid dynamics, that treats water as a force to be redirected rather than blocked. Modern harbor designers use similar principles, informed by centuries of trial and error. Herod's engineers got it right the first time. The harbor silted up eventually, victim of the very currents it was designed to manage. But 2,000 years of Mediterranean storms couldn't destroy what Roman concrete built. Blocks still locked in position, testament to construction quality that makes contemporary marine structures look temporary by comparison. But if Roman harbor engineering impressed me, the desert city I visited next would demonstrate water management so sophisticated it sustained 20,000 people where nothing should survive. Petra isn't just carved facades and sandstone cliffs. It's a water management system disguised as a city, designed to sustain 20,000 people in a desert that receives less than 6 inches of rain annually. I traced the water channels that snake through the narrow Seek, noting how they're carved to maintain flow during the brief winter rains, directing flash floodwaters into cisterns distributed throughout the city. But the genius reveals itself in the details. The channels include sediment traps, settling pools carved into the rock that allow sand and debris to drop out before water reaches storage tanks. The gradient is so precisely calculated that water flows fast enough to prevent evaporation, but slow enough to avoid erosion. I measured one channel, a drop of exactly 2.5 inches per 100 feet, maintained for over a mile through winding canyons. This requires surveying tools and mathematical calculation we don't credit the Nabateans with possessing. They had to map the entire water course, calculate elevations at multiple points, then carve channels that maintain consistent gradient through terrain that twists and turns unpredictably. One miscalculation and the system fails. Too steep and erosion destroys the channel. Too shallow and water stagnates or flows backward during pressure surges. The cisterns themselves are engineering marvels, carved into cliff faces and sealed with waterproof plaster that still holds water after 2 millennia. I climbed to one cistern high above the city center, finding a chamber that holds over 40,000 gallons. The interior walls are smooth, coated with a pinkish plaster made from crushed pottery mixed with lime. The coating is applied in multiple layers, each one burnished smooth before the next application. This creates a waterproof barrier that prevents seepage into the porous sandstone. Capacity calculations show the city could store enough water to survive 6-month droughts. But storage is only half the solution. Distribution required another network of channels, pipes, and fountains that brought water from cisterns to residential areas, public baths, and gardens. The pipes are ceramic, fitted together with joints sealed using the same waterproof plaster. Pressure regulation was achieved through elevation drops and overflow systems that prevented pipe bursts. I followed one distribution channel from a hilltop cistern down into the city center, noting the careful placement of pressure release valves. Small chambers where excess pressure could escape, preventing damage to the ceramic pipes. This is practical hydraulic engineering that requires understanding fluid dynamics under gravity-fed pressure systems. But what really haunted me was the psychological sophistication. The Nabateans built fountains and public water displays in a city where every drop was precious. These weren't just functional, they were statements of mastery. Demonstrations that the city controlled water so completely that it could afford to display it openly. The sound of running water in a desert city where rainfall is measured in inches per year. That's not just engineering, that's theater. Standing in the street of facades as sunset painted the sandstone gold and crimson, I understood that Petra's true architecture isn't the carved temples. It's the invisible network of channels, cisterns, and pipes that made life possible in an impossible place. But if desert water management impressed me, the city I encountered next would demonstrate construction on a foundation that shouldn't support anything at all. Venice shouldn't be possible. You can't build a city on a lagoon with no bedrock, no solid foundation, just mud and water. Yet here stands a metropolis of stone palaces and marble churches, built on millions of wooden piles driven into sediment, supporting buildings that have stood for over 1,000 years. I took a boat through the small canals, studying the foundations of medieval buildings, realizing that what I'm looking at is effectively a man-made archipelago. The pilings, cut from alder and oak, were driven into the lagoon floor in clusters, each building requiring thousands of individual posts. But here's the impossible part. The wood hasn't rotted. Submerged in oxygen-poor mud, the timber petrified, turning to something harder than the original wood. The Venetians understood anaerobic preservation without knowing the chemistry behind it. They also understood weight distribution, how to balance massive stone structures on foundations that have no connection to bedrock. I examined the Rialto Bridge, a single stone arch spanning the Grand Canal, sitting on pilings driven through 60 feet of sediment. The calculations required to ensure it wouldn't sink or shift involve understanding substrate compression, water displacement, and long-term settling patterns. But what really haunts me is the scope of planning. This wasn't a small settlement that grew over time. Venice was designed as a refuge city, planned to house a large population on terrain that every instinct says is unbuildable. The canal network that serves as streets required mapping the lagoon floor, identifying areas with sufficient depth, then creating artificial islands by driving piles and filling the enclosed spaces with rubble and clay. The major canals follow natural channels through the lagoon, but hundreds of smaller canals were dug to create the neighborhood network. Each one required maintaining minimum depth for boat traffic while ensuring adequate flow to prevent stagnation. The Venetians engineered tidal flow patterns, using the twice-daily influx of seawater to flush the canal system naturally. I spent an afternoon watching tide patterns, noting how water moves through the city with currents that prevent the accumulation of waste and sediment. This is hydraulic engineering on a city scale, treating Venice as a living organism where water circulation maintains health. The system works so well that it's still functional after 1,000 years, though rising sea levels and subsidence now threaten what medieval engineering made possible. The Plague-era quarantine islands reveal another layer of their urban planning sophistication. Lazaretto Vecchio and Lazaretto Nuovo served as isolation hospitals, positioned downwind from the main city, accessible only by boat, designed to contain disease while allowing necessary supply delivery. This is public health planning that required understanding disease transmission principles that Europe wouldn't formally articulate for another 400 years. Standing on the Piazza San Marco, as Acqua Alta began flooding the square, watching water rise through drains and gaps in the ancient paving, I understood Venice's true achievement. They did not conquer nature. They adapted to it, creating a city that floats on water, moves with tides, and endures by surrendering to its impossible foundation. But if Venice demonstrated mastery over its shifting terrain, the first city on the lost coast of Peru showed how planning, geometry, and communal intent could flourish even in a desert. Caral's pyramids and plazas awaited me next, a silent testament to organization and peace older than most ruins in the Americas and the world. The desert wind rattled across sand and reed, carrying the faint smell of salt from the dry Peruvian coast. At first, Caral appeared as little more than a cluster of low, stony hills. But as I approached on foot, the landscape reformed itself. Rectangular plazas, broad staircases, terraces, and cease-towering platform pyramids rising from an arid plain that should not have been able to support so much life. Caral is one of the oldest known urban sites in the Americas, a city that flourished almost 5,000 years ago, around the same age as the pyramids of Egypt and older than the stonework of Mesoamerica. Radiocarbon dating places its origins between 2,600 and 2,000 years before Christ. Yet what's most striking is not the age, but the planning. As I crossed one of the city's wide sunken plazas, I noticed how everything aligns, not just the pyramids, but open spaces, residential zones, and ceremonial structures. The whole settlement unfolds in deliberate geometry. Some plazas are perfectly rectangular, Staircases cut crisp lines against the sky, precisely oriented to the points of the compass. It isn't chaos or improvisation, it's a mastery of space and purpose on a scale that rivals the great cities of Mesopotamia. But it wasn't only monumental stonework that surprised me. Caral's builders designed intricate irrigation canals to catch and channel scant river water, making fields bloom around their city. Engineers today marvel at the efficiency of their canals networks that controlled seasonal floods and kept crops alive through harsh droughts. The climate here is unforgiving, yet the ancients found a way, calculating gradients and flow by sight, achieving what arid towns in later centuries often failed to maintain. I wandered into a circular amphitheater, a sunken disk of stone surrounded by low platforms. Archaeologists believe these spaces were used for music, ceremonies, and community gatherings. Reed instruments, likely some of the world's oldest flutes, have been uncovered here, evidence that even in the earliest days of urban planning, music and ritual lived at the center of society. The amphitheater's acoustics are striking. Stand in the center, and your voice carries to every seat. Caral's layout offers another surprise. Some of its greatest pyramids overlook a network of roads that link distant districts. An ancient main street stretches straight across the center, still clearly marked after millennia of wind and erosion. Alongside the stone footpaths and quarries, there are zones where everyday life thrived. Courtyards, kitchens, and workshops filled with tools and remnants of trade from faraway valleys. There was no pottery, everything was woven, carved, or built from plant fiber. And Sundays after that is perfect for everything. Yet what's missing from Caral matters as much as what remains. No evidence of warfare, no city walls, no burnt layers or mass graves. This city, so sophisticated, appears to have flourished through cooperation. The strength of its planned spaces supporting peaceful assembly and collective ritual. Whenever I paused on the steps of those ancient pyramids, listening to the wind as it moved through abandoned halls, I sensed not just silence but intent. The planners of Caral saw the power of gathering, of aligning their constructions with sun and star, earth and river. Their knowledge shines in roads that still lead somewhere, staircases built for processions, amphitheaters designed for the breath of a flute. This is a city where architecture and society intertwined to create a whole greater than its parts. But as my journey through Caral reached its end, the pointed shadows of those pyramids beckoned further still, toward a northern city famed for cosmic geometry and alignments written in the sand, where lines and figures stretch from horizon to horizon, visible only from the sky above. Teotihuacan's Pyramid of the Sun sits exactly at 15 degrees north of true west. Not approximately, exactly. I stood at the pyramid's western base at spring equinox, watching the sun set directly in line with the structure's western face, knowing that this alignment repeats with mathematical precision year after year, century after century. But this is just one data point in a city designed as a three-dimensional calendar. The Avenue of the Dead runs 15.5 degrees east of true north, aligned with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster on the day the sun passed directly overhead in ancient times. Every major structure in the city relates to this baseline, creating geometric relationships that encode astronomical observations. I mapped the city from above, noting how temple positions create right triangles, how distances between structures follow mathematical ratios, how the entire complex functions as a stone computer calculating celestial cycles. But here's what no one talks about. The subsurface architecture. Ground-penetrating radar shows chambers and tunnels beneath the pyramids, some running for hundreds of feet, all carved or constructed with precision that suggests surveying tools that shouldn't exist in 100 CE. I descended into one tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, finding walls aligned so perfectly that I could sight down the passage and see only darkness, no deviation in over 300 feet. The tunnel's purpose remains debated, but its construction quality is undeniable. The walls are smooth, the floor level, the ceiling height consistent throughout. This is underground engineering that requires maintaining alignment without surface reference points, measuring distances in darkness, ensuring straightness over lengths that make minor errors catastrophic. How did they achieve this? What tools allowed such precision? The astronomical alignments become more complex the deeper you look. The Pyramid of the Moon aligns with Cerro Gordo, the mountain that dominates the northern horizon. But the alignment isn't just visual. The pyramid's height, its distance from other structures, and its position relative to the Avenue of the Dead all encode mathematical relationships that connect it to the broader celestial grid. I spent 3 days taking measurements, checking angles, photographing sight lines. Every calculation revealed new layers of intentional design. The spacing between pyramids follows ratios found in music theory. The dimensions of platforms encode astronomical cycles. Even the street grid that extends beyond the ceremonial center maintains the 15.5-degree deviation from true north, suggesting the entire city was planned as a unified geometric expression. But what chills me is the implication. This level of astronomical knowledge requires generations of observation. Patient tracking of star positions, solar cycles, planetary movements, all recorded and calculated using mathematics we're told Mesoamerica hadn't developed. Yet the evidence is carved in stone, aligned with precision that modern surveyors struggle to match. Standing atop the Pyramid of the Sun at sunset, watching shadows crawl across the ancient city, I understood that Teotihuacan represents something we've lost. The ability to merge architecture with cosmos, to build structures that function as both temple and observatory, to encode knowledge in stone so perfectly that it survives 2,000 years of abandonment and still speaks clearly to those who know how to listen. But if Teotihuacan challenged my understanding of astronomical architecture, the fortress walls I encountered next would demonstrate stone shaping techniques that defy every explanation we've constructed. Sacsayhuaman isn't a fortress. The Spanish called it that because they couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. I stood before walls made of stones weighing up to 200 tons, fitted together with joints so tight that water can't penetrate. But it's the shapes that break your understanding. These aren't rectangular blocks. They're polygonal, multi-angled, interlocking pieces cut to fit like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. I traced the edge of one stone with 17 angles, watching how it meshes with 8 neighboring blocks, each contact point ground to create perfect closure. The effort required to achieve this borders on insanity, unless you understand the purpose. These walls flex during earthquakes. The irregular shapes allow movement while maintaining integrity, turning seismic waves into mechanical energy that dissipates through the structure. Modern earthquake-resistant architecture uses similar principles, but with steel and flexible joints, not by carving stones weighing more than a house into complex geometric shapes. I spent an afternoon photographing the joints, trying to understand the sequence of construction. Did they carve stones to fit existing walls? Did they shape everything in the quarry using templates? Either method requires spatial reasoning and precision measurement that suggests tools and techniques we haven't discovered. The quarry site, miles away, shows stones in various stages of shaping, some abandoned mid-process. What I saw there raised more questions than answers. One unfinished block displays drill holes arranged in patterns that suggest splitting techniques. But the holes are perfectly circular, perfectly aligned, drilled to consistent depths. This is precision boring in granite using tools that supposedly didn't exist in pre-Columbian Peru. The stone surfaces show no chisel marks, no obvious percussion damage from hammering. Instead, they're smooth, almost polished, as if ground rather than cut. Some researchers propose the Inca used harder stones to grind softer ones, a process that would take years per block. But the math doesn't work. The number of stones, the time required, the labor force needed, all of it suggests construction timelines longer than historical records allow. Standing among these megalithic walls, running my hands over joints that defy explanation, I kept returning to the same question. Why? Why invest this enormous effort into creating complex polygonal shapes when simpler rectangular blocks would be easier to work? The earthquake resistance explanation makes sense, but it assumes knowledge of seismology that required centuries of observation and testing. Did the Inca inherit this knowledge from earlier cultures? Were they rebuilding structures that already existed? The lowest courses of Sacsayhuaman's walls show different construction styles than upper levels. The massive polygonal blocks at the base might predate Inca occupation, with the Inca adding smaller, more regular stones on top. This layering appears at sites across Peru, suggesting multiple building phases separated by long time periods. But the locals tell different stories. Stories passed down through generations about stones that were softened like clay, shaped while pliable, then hardened again. Modern archaeology dismisses these as folklore, creation myths meant to explain inexplicable engineering. Yet standing here, touching stones that shouldn't fit together, I'm not so quick to dismiss anything. The precision speaks for itself. The joints are perfect, the shapes are deliberate, the engineering is sound. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it with a level of skill that makes contemporary stone masonry look crude by comparison. But if Sacsayhuaman's stones challenged every assumption about ancient construction, the circular monument I journeyed to next would reveal astronomical knowledge encoded in megalithic architecture that required centuries of patient observation. Stonehenge's fame overshadows its sophistication. Standing among the Sarsens at sunrise, watching light slice through the heel stone on the summer solstice, I understood this isn't primitive monument building. This is precision architecture, designed to track multiple celestial cycles simultaneously. The circle isn't quite circular. It's slightly elliptical, creating specific sight lines that mark not just solstices, but lunar cycles, eclipses, and stellar observations. The stones themselves present an engineering challenge that still lacks satisfying answers. Sarsen stones weighing 25 tons each, transported from quarries 20 miles away, then raised upright and capped with lintels held by mortise and tenon joints, carved into solid rock. I examined one lintel still in place, running my fingers over the joint that's held for over 4,000 years. The tenon is tapered, wider at the base, creating a lock that tightens under the lintel's weight. This is sophisticated joinery executed in stone by people we're told were just emerging from the Stone Age. But the joints represent only part of the challenge. The lintels curve slightly, following the circle's arc, requiring each one to be shaped differently to maintain consistent spacing and height around the entire structure. But what freezes me is the astronomical precision. The monument's alignments encode observations that require decades of patient sky watching, mathematical calculation of cycles, and geometric knowledge to translate observations into stone positions. The Aubrey holes that ring the outer circle number exactly 56, potentially functioning as a calculator for predicting eclipses using a system that requires understanding the 18.6-year lunar cycle. I spent hours studying the hole positions, noting how they're spaced at regular intervals, each one carefully excavated, then filled with chalk rubble. If they served as counting markers, moving stones or posts around the circuit would allow tracking lunar phases across decades, predicting when eclipses would occur with remarkable accuracy. This is computational astronomy using physical markers instead of written records. The blue stones, smaller pillars arranged in inner circles, came from Wales, over 140 miles away. Recent research suggests they might have acoustic properties, ringing like bells when struck. Were they chosen for this quality? Does Stonehenge incorporate sound into its astronomical functions? The questions multiply the deeper you explore. Standing there as stars emerged overhead, I tried to imagine the builders, generation after generation observing the sky, noting patterns, calculating cycles, then committing this knowledge to stone. The effort spans lifetimes. A child who watched their grandparents mark sunrise positions would become the elder teaching their own grandchildren to continue the work. This is knowledge accumulation on timescales that modern society can barely comprehend. The monument evolved through multiple building phases, each one adding complexity to the astronomical observations it could track. But even the earliest phases show understanding of solar and lunar cycles that required sophisticated observational astronomy. This wasn't primitive sky watching, this was systematic data collection, analysis, and physical computation using megalithic architecture. As darkness fell completely, I realized Stonehenge's true purpose. It's a bridge between earth and sky, a tool for understanding cosmic patterns, and proof that our ancestors possessed intellectual sophistication we've spent millennia trying to rediscover. The stones don't just mark celestial events. They embody the eternal human drive to understand the universe, written in megaliths that have outlasted empires. Every city I've explored on this journey reveals the same truth. We didn't invent precision engineering, astronomical observation, or sophisticated urban planning. We inherited them from ancestors who mastered these arts millennia before we gave them names. The dust on my boots tells the story of 15 impossible cities, each one a question mark carved in stone, built on principles we're only beginning to understand. I've traced water channels that shouldn't work, measured angles that defy coincidence, and stood before walls that mock our timeline of human progress. What haunts me isn't the individual achievements, it's the pattern. From the Indus Valley to the Peruvian Andes, from Turkish highlands to English plains, the same sophistication appears. Precision engineering, astronomical alignment, hydraulic mastery, urban planning that treats entire cities as unified systems designed before the first stone was laid. These weren't isolated geniuses stumbling toward civilization. This was implemented knowledge, complete and systematic, appearing in cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Either humanity independently discovered the same advanced techniques dozens of times, or something we don't yet understand connected these ancient builders. Shared knowledge from an older source, perhaps, or capabilities we've forgotten how to recognize in archaeological records. The academic explanations feel increasingly inadequate. Trial and error doesn't account for first attempt perfection. Simple tools don't explain precision that modern equipment struggles to match. Primitive astronomy doesn't predict eclipses using megalithic calculators. Yet here the evidence stands, weathered but undeniable, waiting for us to ask better questions. I've learned to read ruins differently now, not as dead relics of the past, but as messages from ancestors who possessed understanding we've spent millennia trying to relearn. They didn't write libraries, they built them in stone, encoded their knowledge in alignments and gradients and perfectly fitted joints. Languages that transcend words, speaking directly through mathematics and engineering principles that remain true regardless of culture or era. Tonight, as firelight flickers across my journal, I'm adding notes about the next expedition. Because these 15 cities are just the beginning. There are more grid systems waiting in jungle overgrowth, more astronomical alignments hidden beneath desert sand, more impossible engineering that challenges everything we think we know about human history. The ruins don't whisper. They wait. Patient as the stones they're built from, holding their secrets until we're ready to see what they've been showing us all along. Our ancestors weren't primitive. They were sophisticated beyond our current ability to comprehend. And somewhere in the dust and rubble of their greatest achievements lies the key to understanding not just where we came from, but what we're capable of becoming. Another chapter closes, but the expedition continues, always continues.